Give them a bunch of Benadryl, knock them on the
Come
knee.
back and go get more pieces if we need it. You know, they don't like to open order and.
Yep. That's what I have to do.
Yeah, and I told Cass,
You ready, Kelsey? This special meeting of the Detroit Lake City Council is called to order. And before we get into the agenda, Larry Remen has got an announcement he'd like to make to the council. Larry?
The Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission called me this morning, and the DMRA grant has been approved for $1.325 million.
Awesome. All right.
Good deal.
Always good news. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is consideration to accepting or rejecting the bids for the City Hall remodel project. And I think I'll call on our city administrator, Kelsey, to introduce this item.
Yeah, Mayor and Council will give you a little bit of a summary of kind of how we got to this point. So we had bid opening on October 6th, and that bid tab, I believe, was in your packet. I think you also got a hard copy on your desk. Good news is we had good response. We had 6 bids that came in, 6 general contractors. I always get the question, why is labor and material split? Just so you know, we do that so we can get our sales tax exemption, and that's the way we have to go through that process. A little bit of a headache, because then on all the alternates, they too have to split out labor and material. But as you can see, we had bids range from a low of about $6.7 million to over $8 million. And obviously the issue, even with the good turnout on bids, is that even the low bid is more than we had originally estimated or budgeted. So we took these bids to the Finance Committee earlier this month to basically discuss options of, do we award the bid? Do we award the bid with some of these alternates, which are some deductions in the work? Or do we, reject the bids and try to repackage this thing and rebid maybe next summer? And I guess I'm going to summarize the conversation a little bit at the Finance Committee, and I'll let them jump in here later too. But, I think the discussion at the Finance Committee is, well, there probably isn't any major scope change that we see to the project. So when we talk about trying to repackage this thing and rebid next year, maybe there's a few little things, but there's probably not any significant change to the project that can work just based upon the scope of work we're trying to do when you put the elevator in and the necessary changes that are needed. And then the other discussion point really became, well, do we really think that it's going to be cheaper next year? Is the project cost going to go down? Of course, we all watch the economic indicators and signs of a potential recession next year, and how will that impact, and especially how will that impact the commercial construction market? Will that somehow result in cost? Again, it's interesting because the nice thing when you split out the labor and material, you can see, all right, you can, depends upon which side of that argument you're on, you can look at those labor costs or look at the material costs, say, all right, well, what does a reduction of material look like, or what does an increase in material look like? And because I think a lot of people feel that labor is probably not going to go down. So that was some of the conversation at the Finance Committee, and ultimately the Finance Committee directed staff to meet with the architect, meet with the low bidder, which is Bristling Construction, see if there is any identifiable savings that we could do in the project, if there's anything, and then look at the deducts, see what would be recommended for basically reduction to the overall project. And then also directed staff of, well, if we want to proceed, how do we fund it? As we've talked about before, the funding sources for this project have mainly been a 50-50 split between public utilities and the city utilizing the liquor fund, public utilities utilizing the electric fund. And how would that work? And I'll let Heidi probably speak to that a little bit later. And that's kind of what we set out to do. So Matt is here from BHH. And then we also have Bristling Construction here. Maybe, Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll have Matt maybe talk to the discussion we had with the contractor and explain. There's a second sheet which is, it shows what the original estimated cost was and then the actual. And he can talk a little bit about the alternates and maybe what we came out of that discussion for what maybe some project savings are.
Matt, can we hear from you?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So as Kelsey said, there was a number of alternates that we listed on the project, just as a way of offshoots if we needed to look at reducing overall project scope or project cost. I think there was 8 alternates that we had listed. As we went through those, some of those alternates are certainly cost savings, but when you look at long-term, they're probably not the most advantageous from a long-term solution. If you're looking at certainly cutting every nickel and dime out of the project, you could certainly do that. But there's a couple of them we wouldn't recommend, and I think overall, it was about $250,000 in total deduct alternates from the base plan. Of that, there's about 150 or 100 and correct me on this one, 187,000 in deducts that we would recommend that don't severely impact the overall scope and fit function of the project. We also, again, met with contractors. Obviously, when they're putting together their bids, they're looking at every nut, bolt, widget, as we are when we're doing the planning side of it. And aside from the alternates, there wasn't a lot of, let's call it fluff factor in the plans or in the overall design and scope of the project that were, the low-hanging fruit for being able to pull from the project and save X dollars. But of that, kind of brainstorming, there's about $120,000 to $125,000 in potential, let's call it value engineering, that we could ratchet down the scope of the overall project. So that would be in addition to the alternates that were listed. So there are some cost-saving avenues regarding that, but that still puts the total project allowing for a little contingency at about 6.6.
Okay. Why don't we hear from Heidi as well, as far as the financing, how that would work, Heidi?
Mr. Mayor and council members, I've got a handout for you that I've provided, which sort of breaks down this sort of the same information that Matt had provided as well, but in a little bit more detail. So it gives you the estimate from October, the bid numbers that were presented and provided by the contractor, the parent low bidder, and then also those alternates that Matt had discussed in the amount of that $187,000. Those identified other cost savings that were discussed by Matt, that approximate $120,000. We as staff and had also identified some other audio-visual cost savings that were identified at about a $93,000 savings. Added that into the mix. And then added back that contingency. So then we ended up with a final total project cost of about $7.7 million. Again, this is over where we had originally thought the project was going to end up, but looking kind of down the sheet and to the bottom left corner under funding sources, there are a couple of other buckets, if you will, that we can tap into for this project besides the 2 major funding sources. So we've got the Food and Beverage Tax Fund, which can fund the public parking for this project. So there is funding available for that, and we can tap into that to the amount of $223,500. We did set aside some of our ARPA funding for some of the HVAC and mechanical upgrades. The funding available from that funding stream is $119,013. And then the balance would be coming from the liquor fund and the public utilities funding. And so each of those would share about $3,685,000. So you may wonder, what does that do to public utilities and to the liquor fund? When all is said and done, can those funds afford that much cash? We have always planned all along to fund this project via cash on hand or fund balance that we have currently. not borrowing any money or anything like that. The public utilities funds, I believe, can, withstand this. It would draw down some of their fund balances and available funds. However, I think, after a couple of years, they could, bounce back from that and not have it adversely affect their funding for future projects. So I think we can make that work. The liquor fund, obviously that fund is not quite as large as some of our other funds, but it does have a fairly significant unrestricted fund balance at current time. So I did provide a little reconciliation down at the very bottom of your sheet, which shows the current unrestricted fund balance as of the end of last year is about $4 million, just over that. That fund generally makes about $500,000 a year, and so if we look at the end of this project, that will happen sometime, if it were to proceed, probably spring-ish of 2024. So if we factor in, what that fund would make this year in 2022 and next year in 23, and then take out potentially their portion of these costs, that fund would still end up with a fund balance next year of about 1.3 million, and that's that unrestricted fund balance. I'm still comfortable with that. I think that's still sufficient for that fund. It is getting on the low side, so I wouldn't want to go much lower than that in that fund, just for cash flow purposes and for their capital needs, but I do think it's sufficient.
Kelsey, for the council's information, do you want to mention anything from the public utilities?
Yeah.
Or Vernell's here too.
Yeah, certainly. Madeline was part of the discussion too. She's on public utilities. Mayor and council public utilities met Tuesday morning and basically had the same discussion. They did approve the funding request for the amount that is shown here on Heidi's sheet, but certainly wasn't without some hesitancy, some concern about drawing down reserves, of course, and how that might impact the electric fund. Certainly was plenty of discussion, and a lot of the same discussion we also had at Finance Committee. At this price, do we think it's going to come down? All those type of things, but in the end, it did pass.
So I'm sure there's going to be some discussion. Maybe we should, Chairman Zeman, maybe we should get a motion on the table and then we can open up for discussion.
Okay, to start with it, I'll go ahead and I'll make a motion that we accept the bids for the City Hall remodeling project.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded to move forward with the City Hall remodel project and accept the low bid. And we would also make these changes that Heidi went through, correct?
Yeah,
Correct.
The 187 and the,
Correct.
I'm assuming the $187,000
Yeah.
of alternates.
Part of that, right?
that's
So-
part of the motion, right?
So that we would end up with a total cost of $7,714,031.
Okay, so with that, I would open it up for discussion from the council, if there is any.
I would have to say that we met as a finance committee. We had our general contractor, Brisno, there, and then he had all the subcontractors. And we asked every one of them, after we looked at this plan that we have, where they think we could have some cuts on this. And we went down and we could save 5,000 here, we could save 10,000. We were all hoping we could hear people say we could save 100,000 but they bid this thing partially to start this winter, which helped bring this bid work the way that it was anyway. And then we got in discussion of what would happen if we waited and went into spring on this, and they said, well, then you're gonna be talking about some different things, because when we start with spring, we're gonna be bidding other projects, and so this could raise this up, but we already know that the labor costs are gonna go up approximately a minimum of 4 to 5%, and then as far as guessing what the future cost materials is, that's anybody's guess. But in thinking on this for past projects that we've been working on, for 12 years, I've been trying to see that we could get a public works building going. And 6 years ago, if we would have built that public works building, which at that time everybody thought was too high, was gonna be at about 6.5 million. Now we're working with our architect Ortel for that project, and we're hearing now, by waiting 6 years, that 6.5 million is now gonna be 11 to 12 million dollar project. So what we learned on that, the more we waited, the more cost ended up being for building the building that we wanted to have. And that's the concern of myself and I think other people on the finance committee. We could hold this off and hope, but that's a big question. But we know labor's gonna go up. And so after looking at this and after listening to the subcontractors, contractors, we just kind of felt that we're best to move ahead with this project and get it going. We've been in this building for approximately 50 years, 52 years. At the time when this project was done, our population of our city was around 6,200. Now we're a couple hundred people short of being 10,000. So we've seen steady growth. We've had a lot of wear and tear in this building, but this building just doesn't serve the needs of our city anymore and our staffing. And we've got both the city administration is gonna be here, and we're gonna have the presence with the public utilities too in here. So but we just think, rather than waiting and gambling and hoping that prices are gonna go down, like I said, it's anybody's guess, but I do know on one thing on labor costs. Can you imagine businesses going to their employees next summer and saying, geez, it looks like inflation's all over with, so we're gonna give everybody a pay cut? Yeah, that ain't gonna happen. We've got our salary base where it's at, and it's gonna continue to grow. And so I think as far as speaking for the finances chairman, that I am, that the move is to go ahead with it.
Okay, further discussion or questions?
I got a comment.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I'm not on the finance committee. I'm on the public safety committee, which represents the firefighters and the DL Police Department. And we have concerns going forward down the road with those departments. What I was told, the budget on this new city hall was gonna be 5.1 million, and we had the money set aside for it. I was okay with that. A budget's a budget, as far as I'm concerned. I work in the private sector. My company laid off 30 people last week. You're gonna see more layoffs going forward. I, myself, personally think things are gonna get cheaper down the road, just due to the way the economy's gonna be. A budget's a budget, okay? We're way over the budget we initially were sold at 5.1 million. There's a poll on DL online. Anybody can go on there. What should be the next priority project for Detroit Lakes? 43% said renovating and upgrading Washington Park. 6% said renovating City Hall. That was the lowest vote getter out of 4 topics. There was over 1,200 votes that were on this DL online survey. Now, I'm not saying they're all residents in the city of DL, but the priority on a new city hall right now is not on the mind of taxpayers. So myself, I'm against it.
Okay. Further discussion? By the way, before I forget, this will require 6 votes to pass this motion, correct?
Correct.
Further discussion?
I guess I've got a couple comments. I know that the architect did the best they could on putting together a package deal here that was, looking at cost efficiencies and trimming any cost out of here. I think we've got a bare bones building that we can be proud of going into the future here, because, something I hate is spending money for getting, 5 years down the road. This looks like a project that's gonna get us 50, 60, whatever, how many years it's gonna be, but I do wanna have staff that are proud to walk into the building. I wanna have people that are proud of our building. It's not a building like East Grand Forks built, the Taj Mahal up there, but we don't have a flood that destroyed our city. We're fortunate to have funds that are available right now where we can basically pay cash, we're not borrowing money. So I think we're in a position where we should move forward. I spent quite a few years in the construction industry, and anytime somebody thought they'd pull one over on the contractors and think that we'll rebid this, think that we're gonna get something different than what we got the first time, either you get a building that's in worse condition and just we shouldn't have done the project, or you just get a project that's gonna be 25, 30% more expensive. So by waiting, we're not gambling on the interest rates. It's more or less a cash project. We're talking about a building that we can be proud of, and I'm in favor of moving forward, even though it is a higher cost and we're going into uncertain times, but prices aren't going down.
I have a couple comments to
Go
add.
ahead, Natalie, yeah.
So I feel comfortable voting for this project also, or in favor of, because it is not going to be added to the tax levy because the funds are already supported in this budget that Heidi put together. And then the other thing I wanna touch on is that 43% of votes, that Washington Ballpark is in process, but it's, right now waiting on a bonding bill that may or may not happen, but until that happens, we don't know that answer either.
Further comments?
One question I guess I
Matt?
have, looking for clarification on this, Mr. Clem. Looking at these 187,000 alternates there, is that something, and I apologize, I'm not on the finance committee as well, so I haven't been real close to this project, but is this something that we're leaving out that we're gonna look back 5 years and go, God, I wish we would've? Is there something I look at that and go, out of a, $6.6 million, we're cutting out 187, which is great, and I love being fiscally responsible, but is this something that we're gonna look at and go, okay, change exterior siding that in 5 years we're gonna have to do anyway?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I think Matt from BHH probably summed that up best. There's some of the alternates we wouldn't recommend changing, so like alternate 2, which is the siding. Alternate 3 is the wainscoting, wall protections inside. And alternate 6 is the staining on the existing brick. We're not recommending those because those are kind of long-term maintenance issues. The largest one is alternate 1, which is reduction in site work. The biggest change there is the base bid included the parking lot that's directly out here to the west of the building. We were going to close the one access because we really don't need the drive-through anymore, and that would have built up that parking lot to put in a few more extra parking spaces. Sound like a good idea, but there's actually a lot of cost involved because to build it up, we'd have to put retaining walls in and railings and staircases, and that's why we bid as an alternate. Reducing the landscaping, it's just taking a few of the plantings out that we can always add later. Alternate 5 is the privacy fencing. Again, it's basically between us and McDonald's. I don't know if we get rid of all of it at that alternate, but we don't do all of it. Okay. Again, that's something that could certainly be added later if we want to put in more privacy fencing. Alternate 7 is the liner and stain on retaining walls. If we get rid of alternate 1, the retaining walls is significantly reduced. And one of the ideas, if we had this giant, I'm going to say giant, but in my mind, it's a pretty big retaining wall for the parking lot, instead of just having it as a concrete block, we talked about doing this form liner, which would make it look like the rock that's like underneath the underpass. Well, if we get rid of alternate 1, the only retaining wall we end up with is a small one along McDonald's, and at that point, if that's just a concrete retaining wall, I think that's going to be just fine. So, and then alternate 8, it's basically just going from a bad insulation to a spray foam, and we still meet energy code requirements without it, so that's recommended.
Okay. Thank you for the in-depth explanation, I appreciate that. Last comment is, since this isn't going on the taxpayers, we have cash, Aaron, to your point, yeah, it is different than the original budget. Hearing from Heidi that it can be a palatable chunk taken out, I think this is something that we need to move forward with. I agree that in Detroit Lakes, we don't build Taj Mahals. So to go back and cut corners and reduce, there isn't much to reduce there. I'm proud to say that we build a building that's respectable, that's gonna last 50 or 60 years, that isn't the Taj Mahal with granite countertops and a hot tub in the city admin office and everything else. But I think that this is something that the city can be proud of. It's going to be great to have better frontage on Highway 10, that now people can see this and be proud of it, know where we're at. I don't know how many people in town go, where the heck is City Hall? This is something that is gonna be there, that is not gonna be on everybody's taxes throughout town. So I would be in favor for this project.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure.
How can you say the taxpayers are not paying for this? How can you say that?
Well, because it's coming out of the liquor store, that if you don't go
It's
to
a
the liquor
tax.
store,
The taxpayers are paying for it.
Let's address the chair and not each other, if you will.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Wendy, go ahead.
I just wanted to reiterate that we set aside money for this. It's a lot more than we intended. We recognize that, and it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the reality. And I've heard a lot about how it's going to look. I also want to point out that it's also going to be very functional for our staff to do productive, efficient work for the citizens of Detroit Lakes. It's not just a showplace. And we don't want to lose that concept in this discussion, I think. We've got a lot of people jammed in, and how they do the wonderful work that they do is beyond me some days, but I think we need to remember that.
Okay, go ahead, Madeline.
Just a couple of comments. I've sat up here for 14 years, and the first time I walked in the building, I went, wow, there's mold here. Mold, real mold. And I've smelled mold for 14 years that I've been here. So people who work here work in an environment where there is that type of environment around them. And I think that when you do a poll that shows Washington Park, you see a visible thing, and our citizens see that as a visible thing. Our citizens don't see City Hall as a park or anything like that. What we need is a functional building that works well for our staff, that presents a good image, but one that we don't have buckets sitting around in the summertime containing the drips from the HVAC system. One where we know that we don't have to prop doors open to keep airflow going through. Those are the kinds of things that our citizens don't see, but that our staff lives with every day. And I thought long and hard about this because I agree with Aaron in some fashion that it's a difficult pill to swallow. If it were our houses, we would be facing the same type of thing. We have to do something here. We have to do something with the HVAC. We have to try to make this building feasible to work in nowadays with modern technology. There's no point in pouring good money after bad at this point. I think it's necessary, and I struggled with the amount, and I struggled with public utilities. Vernell knows I did. But public utilities agreed for the same reasoning. I will vote yes.
Okay. Any final comments? Otherwise,
I would just like to say that, you know, the decision with the finance committee, with all the contractors there, for 2 hours, we went through this plan, where can we cut? And I look at some of these $5,000 to reduce landscaping. Every business that comes in town, we say, you gotta have landscaping. Well, to me, $5,000, yes, it's a savings, but do we really wanna, is $5,000 looking at this building 50 to 70 years gonna matter? And I look down here as far as having to omit the form liners and stain on the wall here, on the outside walls here, you know, 31,000. Yeah, that's money, but when I'm saying we're looking 50 to 70 years, but the big one is changing the wall insulation product, 39,000. But over 70 years, how much money could we save with our heating and stuff? So I mean, these folks sat there trying to find where we could save without completely having to redo everything and redoing what they've done, trying to get this to where there's add-on. So I think we've got this thing narrowed down as probably about as much as you could without saying, let's just chop everything and move 25% of the building, because that's what it kind of came down to. And we don't want to see that, because we're building a building that's going to last 50 to 70 years. That's what it came down to.
okay, are we ready to vote? Anybody else want final word? Otherwise, I'm gonna call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
The motion carries. The second item on the agenda is a request from Independent School District number 22 for parking. And I think that's Josh out there. Josh, do you wanna?
Jason.
Oh, it's Jason. I couldn't see you with all the light there.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jason Keane, Director of Finance and Operations for the school district. Thanks again for taking the time to consider our request from the school district for some increased parking that's adjacent to the high school property on the streets of Roosevelt Avenue and James Street, specifically on the east side of Roosevelt Avenue, extending from kind of the end of our driveway loop and heading north, if I can try to explain that. I don't know if you have a map to show.
Yep,
or not,
it's in the packet, yep.
Perfect. And then on James Street, on the south side of James Street, extending from the corner of Roosevelt, kind of basically to our parking lot. As you guys are aware, we're kind of close to wrapping up our building project. And that footprint reduced some of the parking for our high school. Our enrollment bubble for our school district is proceeding right now through the high school, and so we have more drivers than we typically would have had in previous years, and so we're kind of short on space. Obviously, we do have some parking lots on the east side of the building that are primarily for staff and faculty that we could open up. The problem that presents for us is that, you know, we now no longer have safe and secure entrances for students coming into those areas as consistently as if they came to the main entrance. And so our request, as we know, you know, to loosen those restrictions in those specific areas would be beneficial and add some much needed parking spots. We understand also the proximity to the residential areas does present some problems, but we want to see if there's a feasible solution between the two parties.
So are there plans to expand the parking right on your site in the future?
That is the hope in the future, yes.
Okay.
You know, I mean, also, you know, when you look kind of at in terms of long-term projections of enrollment, we see that obviously our two biggest classes right now are sophomores and juniors, which are eligible to be drivers.
I've got a question, you know, for this, for request for parking along Roosevelt and James Street. Are we looking at this for, doing it for like 1 year or 2 year until you can get your parking the way you want to have it? Is this something we would make a motion on to do, like it for just 1 year or 2 years and see how it's coming along? Because my deal is right now that we're hearing from neighbors down there about all this parking that's out of control, and now we're gonna put it back in, and you know, if I could see that down the road here in a year or 2 years, you're gonna have proper space for them on your property, that'd be a different story, but I wouldn't wanna see this myself for the sake of the neighbors to have this to be long-term again.
Yeah, I think that it would like to see it as, hopefully, how you describe the word temporary, you know, but, you know, something we could easily revisit in the future.
So when you're saying in the future, what are you looking at? So we could, if we make this motion, we could put a timeline in on it.
I would say 2 years.
2 years?
We could revisit, yeah. And at that point, that bubble of students should be through.
Any further questions or comments? Go ahead, Dan.
I just want to know, so this would allow parking on both sides of the street on Roosevelt?
No, just on the east side.
Just on the east, because isn't there parking on the west now?
Only by permit.
Okay.
So, yeah, the request would be just the east side of Roosevelt, north of their entrance, and then south side of James, just on the south side. We talked about parking on the east side of that whole stretch of Roosevelt, but certainly our recommendation was not to do that area in between the driveways because of cars coming out. It's really nice to have that open now. Again, I'm a little bit biased because I have to pick up a student over there, but when the loop is full too, it also provides a place for cars to pull over, so not having parking in between those driveways is really nice. That's why we're limiting the request just north of that entrance on the east side. And then, reason why I have this on the special agenda, I just want to explain, if I need to have Public Works pull any signs or anything. Now, the weather looks pretty good now all of a sudden, but my concern was, you know, waiting too long, you know, if we had to put signs up or pull signs. But
Well, I live down there, so I'm gonna be fair and not say anything.
So,
Jamie?
I'd like to see us add a no-through traffic sign on that alley that's just north of James, east of Roosevelt, that we've had some complaints on.
I would love to see that too.
So we did put up a 10-mile-an-hour sign, which helped alleviate some of the complaints, but, yeah, we could consider that.
Would you like that to be part of this motion today, Jamie? Or come back next month?
I didn't realize we'd put up a 10-mile-an-hour sign. Is that taking care of the problem? let's, maybe we should just put no,
Council, to be honest with you, I didn't think there was a problem. But we did put up 10 mph signs in both alleys, both directions.
you know, I do think that there is a certain number of folks that are using that as a road. I mean, you
Yeah.
would, if you were that age.
Yeah.
But,
Just suggest,
I think maybe I just go with the no through, I don't know. And while we're at it here.
Kelsey?
up to council, I mean, in that case, I mean, if public safety wants to review this more, you know, that could be something we could just swap out the 10 mph or add to that existing pole, right?
Yes.
So I mean, I guess it's up to council if you
Why don't
want
we
to.
refer it to the Public Safety Committee for that particular item, and we'll just take care of the parking today, if that's all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wendy?
I have a parking question. So if we're talking about the east side of Roosevelt, how will this change impact the people who live like on that side, on the west side of Roosevelt, all that neighborhood?
Well, I don't think it'll be an issue for pulling out onto Roosevelt from the side streets, because there won't be parking on the west side.
So if kids are still not gonna be over there parking in the neighborhood like they did initially, that was a problem.
Right,
This change will not impact that
it
situation.
shouldn't, right,
I had people express concerns about this, and I was trying to make sure I understood it well enough to vote.
Okay,
Question I have is, when we approved this site plan, I remember something about parking and that we didn't, did we allow for less parking than what was required?
They received a variance for 23 parking spaces.
Yeah, it was very minimal.
The ordinance required them to have 550 parking spaces, they put in 527.
so I didn't realize this is a parking by permit. You have to get a permit, correct, to have a parking spot? Because I drove through there the other day and there were quite a few open spots, but those are spoken for, correct?
I guess it's which lot are you speaking? On the east side of the school,
Yeah,
or
the east-
on the west side of the school?
West side of the school.
By the
Yeah, so
tennis courts?
you have the visitor lot, that's kind of the smaller lot, that's
Yep.
kind of at the roof, and then you have the student lot,
But it's all by permit, is that correct?
the student lot. is,
Okay.
yeah.
Not the street.
Pardon?
The street is not
Not the
permitted.
street, no.
The next question, so the intention of the parking on the north end of the Roosevelt and then the James Street, is that intended for staff parking? Is it intended for student parking?
Student parking.
And then, again, they're supposed to then get into the building through,
We have two secure entrances, the main entrance that most kids come, and then the back entrance where the buses drop off. And so, that would be.
Wendy?
I'm sorry, I have another. Earlier you mentioned if we were to utilize the staff parking for overflow of the of the student parking, that would create a security issue for in and out, and yet that's where the kids come in on the buses.
I'd be referring to the far east lot, if we're familiar with the
The one-
wrestling building back there.
Oh, okay.
There is staff parking, there is an entrance back there, but it's not a secure entrance.
I thought it was the other one, thank you.
Okay. I would entertain a motion at this time.
I would make a motion to request for Independent School District 22 for parking along Roosevelt Avenue in James for a period of 2 years, at which time they will have to come back to the council and tell us how they're coming with their planned parking in the future, and it'll go forward from there. So this would be for a period of 2 years.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to allow parking on the east side of Roosevelt and the south side of James Street, right? For a period of 2 years. Discussion?
I've got a tough time supporting this when we gave a variance to, not require the on-site parking during the construction project, and then now we're talking about potentially adding parking in the future and giving this as a end around for what we did before, so I'm gonna vote against the additional parking.
Further discussion? We have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Unless somebody disagrees with my hearing. Item 3 is consideration to a resolution.
I think you better make it count.
Okay, we'll do a roll call. Dan?
No.
Yes.
Natalie?
Yes.
Yes.
Madeline?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
Dan?
No.
Wendy?
No.
Aaron?
Yes.
It passes 6 to something.
63.
Consideration to a resolution authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with MinDOT for the parking lot improvements. Kelsey?
Mayor and council, so previously the council approved basically the federal grant for the parking lot out at the airport. This is the actual state accompanying grant, so they pay a portion of it as well. So I think it's for what, $11,800. So I need a resolution from the council to approve that grant. And then, I don't know if you saw, my update that I sent with kind of an update on this project. It's not gonna happen this fall. It's been pushed back to next spring to try to accommodate the timing of the fueling station project, so.
Okay. I would entertain a motion for approval of this resolution.
So moved.
Motion's been made and seconded to adopt a resolution authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with MinDOT for parking lot improvements at the airport. Discussion?
One question, Mayor.
Go ahead, Matt.
Looking at the parking lot, are you talking actual vehicle parking lot? Or
Yeah.
are you talking fuel island inside the fenced-in runway area?
This project, and it's confusing, but this project is just a parking lot in front of the arrival departure building.
Okay.
And then that whole parking lot will have to get tore up because the fueling lines will go from the new fueling station, and then the tanks are gonna be by the gate that goes back to the hangars.
Okay.
So then the lines will go underneath the parking lot.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. I would like to hear from our city engineer, John Pratt, regarding our road projects. John?
Thanks, Mayor and Council. I wish it wasn't reporting on the status of construction projects on October 28th, but
The
here we
weather's,
are.
the weather's
The weather's
cooperating.
The weather's cooperating, and we need it to continue to cooperate. So we do have some lingering construction here yet, and quite a bit of activity, to say the least. So Westlake Drive Phase 1 and Westlake Drive Phase 2, obviously, those are the most interesting ones to everybody right now. I think there's a lot of fatigue on the detours and things like that, but we are seeing some light here. So Westlake Drive Phase 1, which would be Legion to County Road 6, very good progress there. I have to commend the contractor. They've done a fantastic job of moving that project ahead. Curb and gutter, the main line is finished up as of yesterday. Today, I expect they'll finish all the handwork, kind of the fill-ins and radiuses and things like that. They're actually also gonna be starting to pour some of the driveway aprons and things of that nature today. A few more days of that into next week. Early next week, they'll be placing the final aggregate base in prep for paving, which is sort of targeted for maybe about Thursday of next week. So by the end of next week, if all things go well and weather holds, we would have sort of a paved road. The question is, how quick are we gonna open it? It depends on the weather. If the weather holds, I want them to continue to work, because whatever we get done this year is gonna shorten up the closure for next year. So I'm asking everybody just kind of be patient. If the weather holds, I don't wanna kick them out of there. If the weather doesn't, we're probably looking at opening that up sometime in the next week and a half to 2 weeks. So we'll see where that goes. But to remind everybody, under any circumstance, we will be closing that section again in the spring. It won't be for a terrible long time, but they have to finish the trail and some of this underground stormwater treatment. So that's what that looks like. Phase 2, which is from County Road 6 to the Pelican River, that one is a little bit further behind. They're making some progress. They've got a little bit of underground storm sewer stuff to finish up here. Probably finishing that early next week is my hope. They've got the curb and gutter contractor coming in middle of next week to finish up the curb, potentially get some driveways and things like that down. Looking at paving now probably around the week of November 7th. So that's getting a little late in the season, but still doable. Just need that weather to cooperate. And then again, we will have work in the spring of '23. It's unclear to me right now whether we'll have to close that segment to traffic in the spring or not. It just depends how much they get done this year. If we get enough done, I think we can actually finish things up under traffic and avoid that nasty detour again, but we'll have to see. Willow Street, I think probably most people saw or noticed that we did complete some grinding on that, made a significant improvement on the ride. We got the trees planted. There's just a few lingering cleanup items on that, but that project's effectively finished up in its entirety. There'll be some warranty work and some other corrections on some things next spring, but pretty minor in the scope of everything. And then last but not least is the museum and DLCCC parking lot project. That one unfortunately is in a little different boat. I think you've heard me talk about there was some significant delays with starting that project due to the asbestos abatement in the existing museum or the old museum. And that really delayed the contractor's ability to start the parking lot work and sort of a snowball ripple effect on down the line. By the time they could demo that museum, that contractor's schedule got very busy and they haven't been able to get to it yet. We met yesterday, had a good discussion though. There still is a plan to demo that museum, hopefully sometime in the next couple weeks. And we are still hopeful that they're gonna get in there and get some grading done on that parking lot, so at least the parking situation can improve at the community center and the theater and the museum over the winter. Best case scenario is we sort of get a graded gravel lot, right? And next spring, we'll put curb and gutter and pavement down. Worst case scenario, they take the museum down and they sort of grade out a temporary lot to sort of improve the parking over the winter, so. That's
right.
where we're at.
Thank you, John.
Question for
Go
John.
ahead, Dan.
How's the county coming on Highland Drive?
That's pretty well buttoned up. I would be a little surprised if that's not open, maybe even today.
I drove it yesterday.
Yeah, there were
It's
barricades off.
open on one end.
So
Okay.
it's sort of open.
Yeah.
It's not striped yet, is it gonna be striped?
They're gonna, striping I think is coming early next week is last I heard. So,
Okay,
but-
that's the only thing I noticed that wasn't done
Yep, they
when
were
I
basically,
went around the
that's probably why they
barricades.
have a few barricades sort of up, is the striping's not done yet, so.
Thank you.
Okay,
I've got one item.
okay.
One item, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities Fall Conference is coming up on November 17th and 18th. This conference made for city council people, and it's a wealth of information about how the things that happen in St. Paul affects all of us in our cities, information about grants and everything else that's gonna go on that affects how we do our job here. And it's an excellent conference. If you haven't gone before, you should, because it's all about the future of our state and the future of our cities. And like I said, a wealth of information, and just about everybody in the state comes to this thing, and it just gives a whole different perspective on the future of what's gonna happen with our state with funding and so forth. So please plan, if you can make it November 17th, 18th, see Carrie or Glory or Kelsey, and we'll get you signed up on it.
And Gloria, you're gonna put that public safety item on the agenda.
Right.
For Carrie. Okay, the business of this council has come to a